The crystalline spires of the celestial concordat stretched like frozen lightning against the backdrop of 3 setting suns. Ambassador James Thorne stood at the viewport of his diplomatic shuttle, watching the massive structure grow larger as they approached. His reflection showed a tall man in his 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the rainbow light from the nearby nebula. Approaching final docking sequence, Ambassador, the pilot's voice crackled through the calm. The Concordat security forces are expressing concerns about our minimal escort. Thorne's lips curved into a slight smile. Standard procedure, pilot. Maintain course. The celestial Concordat served as the seat of power for the Galactic Council, where representatives from over 5,000 species gathered to maintain the delicate balance of interstellar peace. Humanity, being the newest addition to the galactic community, often found itself under intense scrutiny. The shuttle glided into the massive docking bay, where a delegation of various alien species waited. At their head stood First Speaker Nyrix, her translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that indicated barely contained agitation. Beside her, the massive form of Security Director Graxthor loomed, his crystalline carapace reflecting fractals of light. Thorne descended the shuttle's ramp alone, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The delegation's translator drones hummed to life, creating a subtle background chorus of mechanical whispers. Ambassador Thorne, Nyrix's patterns flashed with formal greeting colors. We expected a larger diplomatic contingent. The Concordat protocols clearly state that any recognized representative may speak for their species, Thorne completed smoothly. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Constitutional Accords. I speak with Earth's full authority. Graxthor's crystalline form vibrated with what Thorne recognized as disapproval. One human to represent your entire species. Your arrogance matches the reports. Not arrogance, Director. Efficiency. Thorne's gray eyes met Graxthor's crystalline sensors. Shall we proceed to the chambers? I believe we have several matters of importance to discuss. The delegation led him through towering corridors designed to humble visitors. Holographic displays showed the achievements of member species, conspicuously absent of any human accomplishments. Thorne noted the positioning of security drones, shield generators, and the subtle weapon emplacements disguised as architectural features. In the main chamber, thousands of representatives filled the ascending rings of seats, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. The air hummed with the sound of countless translator drones working in concert. The human ambassador appears before the council, First Speaker Nyrix announced, her bioluminescence broadcasting to the entire chamber. To address accusations of unauthorized military expansion in the Outer Rim territories. Thorne stepped forward to the central platform. Distinguished members of the council, I come before you today to address what I believe is a fundamental misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? A voice boomed from the upper tiers. Councillor XNR, the massive gas-based entity, swirled in his containment field with agitation. Your species has established 39 military outposts in protected space. Defensive installations, Thorne corrected calmly. Each positioned to protect legitimate human colonial and mining operations, as permitted under Article 12 of the Colonial Rights Agreement. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of protests. Thorne noticed Security Director Graxthor signaling to his forces. The crystalline being's surface rippled with aggressive patterns. We have evidence, Graxthor announced, of these defensive installations launching raids into neighboring systems. A serious accusation, Thorne replied, his voice cutting through the noise. I assume you have proof that meets the Council's evidentiary standards. A moment of uncomfortable silence followed. Thorne allowed himself a small smile. No. Then perhaps we should discuss the real reason for this gathering. The Shadowcrest Initiative. The chamber went deadly quiet. First Speaker Nyrix's bioluminescence paled to almost nothing. That is a classified matter. Indeed it is, Thorne agreed. Just as classified as the weapon shipments being funneled through supposedly neutral territory to the Crimson Hand pirates. Interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say? Security forces began moving into position around the chamber's edges. Thorn noted their positions without appearing to look at them. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, even as tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. "You dare accuse the council," Graxthor began. "I dare to seek the truth, Director. Isn't that why this body exists?" Thorn's gray eyes swept the chamber. "Unless, of course, there's something more significant at stake here than a few defensive outposts." First Speaker Nyrix's patterns showed alarm. "Ambassador Thorn, you are overstepping." "Am I? Or am I finally asking the questions nobody in this chamber wants to answer?" He turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. "Humanity didn't come here today to be judged. We came to ensure the peace we all claim to value is actually maintained." The security forces were almost in position now. Thorn could feel the familiar weight of decision pressing down on him. Sometimes, he mused, the hardest part of diplomacy was deciding when to stop being diplomatic. "Choose your next words carefully, human," Graxthor warned, his crystalline form now pulsing with barely contained energy. Thorn straightened his tie, a gesture that would have seemed nervous in anyone else. But there was something in his movements, something predatory, that made several nearby representatives edge away. "Oh, Director," he replied softly, "I always do." The tension in the council chamber crystallized into something darker as Thorn's words hung in the air. Security Director Graxthor's crystalline form had shifted to deep crimson, a color Thorn's briefings had identified as combat readiness. "You speak of truth, Ambassador," First Speaker Nyrix's bioluminescence pulsed in complex patterns. "Yet your own background seems inconsistent." Thorn maintained his calm demeanor, though he noticed the subtle shift in security positioning. They were creating a containment pattern, one that might have worried a less experienced operative. "My credentials are a matter of public record." "Are they?" A new voice cut through the chamber. Delegate Voss of the Archival Concordant rose from his seat, his arachnid form casting strange shadows in the chamber's light. "Our data specialists have found peculiarities. Gaps. Inconsistencies. Diplomatic records are often classified," Thorn countered smoothly. "As I'm sure many in this chamber can attest." Voss clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his species. "These aren't mere classifications, Ambassador. These are erasures. Professional ones." The arachnid's multiple eyes fixed on Thorn. "The kind our systems rarely encounter, except in matters of military intelligence." The chamber's atmosphere shifted. Representatives from a dozen species began quietly accessing their own data networks, urgent whispers filling the air with a susurration of suspicion. "If you have concerns about my credentials," Thorn said, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate casualness, "there are diplomatic channels. Channels you've used to infiltrate this council." Graxthor's accusation rang out. The crystalline being's surface now rippled with combat patterns. "You're no diplomat. You're a human military asset." Thorn noticed the subtle change in the security forces' stance. Their weapons weren't quite drawn, but safety protocols had been disengaged. He could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline, carefully controlled, as his mind calculated angles, distances, threat assessments. "Director," First Speaker Nyrix intervened, her patterns showing concern, "these are serious accusations." "Which is why security protocols must be enacted," Graxthor cut in. "For the safety of this assembly, Ambassador Thorn will submit to a deep scan and temporary detention." A ripple of agreement passed through the chamber. Thorn noticed several smaller species making discreet exits. They, at least, seemed to sense what was coming. That would be a violation of Section 11 of the Diplomatic Accords, Thorn reminded them quietly. An act that could be considered a declaration of war. "Only if you truly are a diplomat," Voss clicked. "Our preliminary scans suggest otherwise." Your neural patterns match military training profiles. Your muscle density and bone structure show signs of extensive enhancement. Even now, your heart rate hasn't elevated despite clear threat indicators. Thorn allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps I'm simply good at my job. Or perhaps, Graxthor rumbled, you're exactly what we feared humanity would send. A wolf in diplomatic clothing. Security forces began moving forward, their weapons humming to life. Thorn remained perfectly still, only his eyes moving as he tracked potential threats and escape routes. Last chance, Director, Thorn warned softly. Think very carefully about your next action. Scan him, Graxthor ordered. Full spectrum analysis. If he resists, check his military records, a voice called out. An elderly Meridian observer, her floating form barely visible in the chamber's upper reaches, descended rapidly. Cross-reference with the Phantom Initiative. The chamber erupted in chaos as security officers rushed forward. Thorn's hand moved to straighten his tie, a gesture that looked nervous but served to activate the quantum shield woven into his suit's fabric. Ambassador James Thorn, the Meridian's voice cut through the chaos, formerly designated as Operation Phantom. The ghost of the Perseus campaign. The security forces froze. Even Graxthor's crystalline form seemed to pale. The Perseus campaign was a myth, someone whispered. One operative couldn't have neutralized an entire pirate fleet. Thorn finished, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. Interesting theory. One that's about to be tested, it seems. The first security officer raised his weapon. Thorn sighed internally. Sometimes diplomacy required a more direct approach. As the chamber erupted into chaos, he reflected that perhaps humanity wasn't the only species that needed to learn from history. Those who remembered the Perseus campaign were about to get a refresher course. The first plasma bolt sizzled through the space where Thorn had stood a fraction of a second earlier. He moved like liquid mercury, his carefully maintained diplomatic facade dropping away to reveal something far more lethal. Hold fire. First Speaker Nyrix's patterns flashed emergency signals, but it was too late. The security forces had already committed to their course of action. 3 officers rushed Thorn simultaneously, their powered armor humming with energy. The first officer's strike met empty air as Thorn slipped past the attack with almost casual grace. The second found his armor's power core suddenly offline, disabled by a small device Thorn had palmed during his movement. The third's neural stunner went flying, somehow reversed to target its wielder. Fascinating, Delegate Voss observed from his elevated position, mandibles clicking rapidly. Notice how he's deliberately using non-lethal techniques. Even now, he's maintaining diplomatic protocols. Shut down the chamber's gravity wells. Graxthor ordered, his crystalline form pulsing with combat frequencies. Trap him in null space. Thorn's hand slipped into his jacket, emerging with what appeared to be an ordinary stylus. As the gravity plating beneath his feet began to deactivate, he drove the stylus into the floor. Quantum anchors deployed, maintaining his position while security forces around him began floating helplessly. The Perseus campaign, the elderly Meridian observer called out, her floating form untouched by the gravity fluctuations. 3 weeks of impossible victories. Entire pirate strongholds found empty, their leaders gone without a trace. No evidence, no witnesses, just results. More security forces poured in from the upper levels. Thorn noted their positions without appearing to look at them. His quantum anchor had bought him time, but he knew the real challenge was still coming. You're making a mistake, Director, Thorn addressed Graxthor calmly, even as he disabled 2 more security officers with precise strikes to their armor's weak points. This doesn't have to escalate. You infiltrated our highest council. Graxthor's form sparkled with battle rage. You spied on our most sensitive deliberations. I attended meetings I was invited to, Thorn corrected, ducking under a neural pulse and sliding past another guard. And discovered things you'd rather keep hidden. The weapons shipments. The staged pirate attacks. The attempts to destabilize human space. The chamber went quiet save for the groans of disabled security officers. Even first speaker Nyrix's bioluminescence had dimmed to almost nothing. Your advancement was too rapid, Graxthor declared, but there was a note of uncertainty in his harmonic tones. Your species needed to be contained. Contained? Thorn's voice carried an edge now. You engineered conflicts in our territory. Armed our enemies. All while preaching peace and cooperation. He disabled another guard without taking his eyes off Graxthor. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? The Phantom Initiative, the Meridian Observer mused aloud. Created not to wage war, but to prevent it. Operatives trained to handle impossible situations with minimal force. To find diplomatic solutions even in the midst of combat. A squad of elite guards entered through the chamber's main doors, carrying heavy weaponry. Thorn noted their positions with a slight tilt of his head. Your species is dangerous, Graxthor declared. Unpredictable. Look how easily you turn to violence. Says the one who ordered security to fire on a diplomatic representative, Thorn countered. He straightened his tie, a gesture that caused several nearby representatives to flinch. I came here to talk. You chose escalation. And now? First speaker Nyrix asked, her patterns showing genuine concern. Now we find out if the council really wants peace, Thorn replied, his gray eyes scanning the chamber, or if humanity needs to rethink its diplomatic approach entirely. The elite guards raised their weapons. Thorn's hand moved to his cufflink, where a small quantum device hummed to life. In the galleries above, representatives began evacuating, remembering stories of the Perseus campaign and what one human operative could do. Final warning, Director, Thorn announced, his voice carrying an authority that made even the elite guards hesitate. Stand down your forces, or I'll be forced to demonstrate why the title Phantom wasn't just for show. The chamber's lights flickered, and in that moment, the legend of the Perseus campaign ceased to be just a story. It became a promise. When the lights returned to full power a second later, Thorn was gone. The elite guards spun in confusion, their weapons tracking empty air. A soft click echoed through the chamber, and suddenly half their weapons powered down, quantum cores disabled by unseen hands. Impossible, Graxthor's crystalline form vibrated with disbelief. The chamber's security systems were upgraded last cycle, Thorn's voice echoed from somewhere above. By a consortium that received funding through shell companies linked to human intelligence services. Another click, and the chamber's main displays activated, showing surveillance footage of secret meetings, weapon shipments being loaded onto supposedly peaceful vessels, and council members accepting bribes from known criminal organizations. While you were busy watching for human military expansion, Thorn continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, you missed the real threat. We didn't need warships to protect our interests. We just needed patience. And information. 3 more elite guards went down, their armor disabled by precisely placed quantum disruptors. They never saw their attacker. The remaining guards formed a defensive circle, but their helmet sensors showed only ghostly movements, there and gone too fast to track. The Perseus campaign wasn't about military victory, the elderly Meridian Observer announced, her voice carrying new authority. It was a message. One you failed to understand. First speaker Nyrix's patterns shifted rapidly between fear and realization. The pirate strongholds. They weren't destroyed. They were infiltrated. Thorn appeared suddenly beside her, causing nearby representatives to leap back. Their leaders weren't killed. They were compromised. Their operations weren't shut down. They were turned. He vanished again as plasma bolts sparked through his previous position. 2 more guards found their systems offline, their advanced armor reduced to expensive paperweights. Everything you feared about humanity, his voice echoed, made you blind to what we actually are. We don't want war. We don't even want dominance. 3 more guards dropped, disabled by phantom strikes. We want stability. Safety for our colonies. Fair trade. Then what is this demonstration meant to prove? Graxthor demanded, his crystalline form pulsing with frustrated energy patterns. The last guard's weapon suddenly disassembled itself in his hands, components clattering to the floor. Thorn materialized in the center of the chamber, straightening his perfectly maintained suit. That deception works both ways, he replied calmly. You thought you were containing a potential threat. Instead, you've been negotiating with it all along. Displays around the chamber now showed more footage, human ships providing aid to struggling colonies, human medical technology being shared with frontier worlds, human engineers helping to rebuild worlds devastated by natural disasters. The Phantom Initiative wasn't created to win wars, Thorn explained, meeting Graxthor's gaze steadily. It was created to prevent them. By any means necessary. By infiltrating our highest councils. First speaker Nyrix's patterns showed a complex mix of anger and admiration. By understanding them, Thorn corrected. Everything I've done here today was legal under council law. The security forces acted without authorization. My response was proportionate and non-lethal. And now. He gestured, and the chamber's systems came back online. The disabled guards began to stir, their armor rebooting. Now you have a choice, he continued. We can escalate this into a diplomatic crisis. One that will reveal the Council's illegal activities to every member species. Or. Graxthor's tone carried a new note of respect. Or we can all return to our seats, and have the discussion we should have had from the beginning. About cooperation. About trust. About the future we could build together, if we stop playing shadow games. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The human they had dismissed as a simple diplomat had penetrated their deepest security, exposed their darkest secrets, and neutralized their best forces. And yet he stood there, still offering peace. First speaker Nyrix's patterns shifted to formal diplomatic modes. Perhaps we should reconvene the session. Properly this time. Thorn smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. I thought you'd never ask. The council chamber had transformed in the hours following Thorn's demonstration. Gone was the hostile atmosphere, replaced by something far more complex, a mixture of respect, wariness, and dawning understanding. The evidence is comprehensive, Delegate Voss acknowledged, his arachnid form moving through the holographic displays of council corruption. The weapon shipments, the staged attacks, the manipulation of colonial borders, all verified. First speaker Nyrix's bioluminescence had settled into patterns of deep thought. You could have exposed this at any time, Ambassador Thorn. Why wait? Thorn stood calmly at the center of the chamber, looking more like a professor than the operative who had disabled an elite security force minutes earlier. Exposure wasn't the goal. Understanding was. Understanding. Graxthor's crystalline form had shifted to diplomatic frequencies, though traces of combat patterns still rippled beneath the surface. You infiltrated our highest levels of government. No, Thorn corrected gently. I joined them. Legally. Openly. Everything I've done has been within council law. That was the point. The elderly Meridian observer drifted closer, her form glowing with approval. The Phantom Initiative. Not just warriors or spies, but something entirely new. Diplomats who could fight. Soldiers who could negotiate. The perfect response to a galaxy that wasn't ready for humanity's arrival. Thorn nodded. We knew joining the galactic community wouldn't be easy. Too many species saw us as primitives, barbarians who'd somehow stumbled onto faster-than-light travel. Others saw us as a threat to be contained. None of you truly saw us as what we are. And what is that? Nyrix asked, her patterns showing genuine curiosity. Survivors. Adapters. A species that rose from a single world to touch the stars not through conquest, but through persistence. Through learning. Through understanding our opponents better than they understood themselves. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. The human diplomatic corps wasn't just a political entity. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation, gathering information not for warfare, but for preservation. Your defensive installations, Graxtor began, are exactly what we claimed, Thorn finished. Protection for our colonies. Nothing more. The real defense of human space was never going to come from ships or weapons. It would come from making ourselves too valuable to attack. Too integral to the galactic community to isolate. He gestured, and new displays appeared, showing trade routes, scientific collaborations, humanitarian missions. While you were watching our military, we were building connections. Helping struggling colonies. Sharing medical technology. Creating bonds that would make conflict unthinkable. The Perseus campaign, someone whispered. It wasn't about destroying the pirates. It was about transforming them, Thorn confirmed. Many of those same pirates now run legitimate shipping companies. Their crews protect the trade lanes they once raided. Because we showed them a better way. First speaker Nyrix's patterns shifted to formal diplomatic modes. What are you proposing, Ambassador? A fresh start. Real cooperation. The Council was created to maintain peace and stability. Let's actually do that. No more shadow games. No more proxy conflicts. His gray eyes swept the chamber. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to help build something better. And if we refuse? Graxtor asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Thorn smiled slightly. Then tomorrow, every species in known space learns about the Council's corruption. Every illegal deal, every secret agreement, every manipulation. And humanity. He straightened his tie. Humanity will continue doing what we've always done. Surviving. Adapting. Moving forward. The chamber erupted in discussion, representatives hurriedly conferring with their governments. But there was a different tone now. Understanding was replacing fear. Respect was overcoming suspicion. A remarkable strategy, the Meridian Observer commented. Using diplomacy as a weapon, and combat as a negotiating tool. No, Thorn corrected softly. Using truth as both. Sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to show why it's unnecessary. As the Council began organizing into formal session to discuss the new reality, Thorn allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Phantom Initiative had achieved its goal. Not through violence or threats, but through understanding. Through showing the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its ability to fight. It was its ability to change the rules of the game entirely.